My name is Samantha Brooks, and I'm 28 years old. I never imagined that a simple family dinner would turn into the moment my entire world exploded. There I sat at my parents' dining table, exhausted from my 12-hour shift as a nurse practitioner, when my sister Victoria announced her engagement with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. But then my parents dropped the bomb that changed everything forever. "Samantha, you'll be paying for Victoria's wedding. $50,000. It's your duty as her sister." The room went silent as all eyes turned to me, waiting for my response. What I said next would shatter our family forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Make sure to subscribe because trust me, you won't want to miss how this family drama unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Brooks household meant learning early that there were two sets of rules, one for Victoria and one for everyone else. Victoria, my younger sister by 3 years, had always been the golden child, the princess who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. While I spent my teenage years working part-time jobs to save for college, Victoria received everything she wanted without question. New clothes every season, a brand new car for her 16th birthday, expensive vacations that somehow never included me because I was too busy with work anyway. The pattern had been so consistent throughout our lives that I'd almost become numb to it. When Victoria wanted to join the expensive dance academy, my college fund mysteriously disappeared to pay for her lessons. When she decided she wanted to attend an out-of-state university, my parents took out a second mortgage on the house to cover her tuition and living expenses. Meanwhile, I put myself through nursing school with student loans, grants, and working nights at a local diner. Every time I asked for help, the answer was always the same: Victoria needs it more right now, or you're so much more capable of handling things on your own. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Tuesday evening in March. Victoria had been dating Derek for only 8 months, a guy who claimed to be an entrepreneur but seemed to spend most of his time playing video games in his apartment. Suddenly, he was presenting himself as this successful business owner, driving a fancy car that appeared out of nowhere, and talking about his investments in vague terms that never quite made sense. The family meeting was called with all the ceremony of a board of directors announcement. My parents sat at the head of the table, Victoria and Derek positioned like royalty beside them, while I was relegated to the far end like some distant relative invited out of obligation. Victoria's engagement ring was massive, clearly expensive, and completely impractical for someone whose last job had been part-time retail work that ended 6 months ago. "We've been doing some planning," my mother began, her voice taking on that sugary sweet tone she reserved for Victoria's special moments. "The wedding needs to be absolutely perfect. Victoria deserves nothing less than a fairy tale celebration." My father nodded approvingly, his chest puffed out with pride as if he were personally responsible for his daughter's happiness. Victoria giggled and held up a thick binder filled with magazine cutouts, venue brochures, and dress pictures that looked like they belonged in a celebrity wedding magazine. The numbers they threw around made my head spin. $15,000 for the venue, $8,000 for catering, $5,000 for photography, $3,000 for flowers, and the list went on and on. When they finally reached the total of $50,000, I nearly choked on my water. That was more money than I made in an entire year after taxes, student loan payments, and basic living expenses. "But don't worry," Victoria said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "we already figured out how to handle the finances. Samantha will cover everything. It's the least she can do as my maid of honor and big sister." The casual way she announced this, as if my financial contribution was already a done deal, sent ice through my veins. My parents nodded along enthusiastically, clearly having discussed this arrangement without ever consulting me. "Wait just a minute," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody asked me about paying for anything. I can't afford $50,000. I have my own bills, my own life, my own financial responsibilities." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright anger. My father's voice boomed across the table with an authority that transported me back to childhood. This is about family loyalty, Samantha. This is about doing what's right for your sister's happiness. You make good money at that hospital job. You don't have a husband or children to support. Victoria needs this wedding, and you're going to provide it. The finality in his tone suggested that my financial situation, my dreams, my future plans were completely irrelevant compared to Victoria's wedding fantasies. That's when my mother delivered the first real attack, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. If you can't support your own sister's happiness, if you're too selfish to help family when we need you most, then maybe you don't really belong in this family at all. The threat hung in the air like poison, and I realized this wasn't a request or even a demand. This was an ultimatum disguised as a family obligation, and my parents were dead serious about forcing my compliance through emotional manipulation and guilt. The days following that disastrous family dinner unleashed a coordinated assault on my sanity that I never saw coming. My mother, who had always been skilled at emotional manipulation, launched into what could only be described as a masterclass in guilt warfare. Phone calls started arriving at all hours, each one beginning with her trembling voice describing mysterious chest pains and doctor visits that coincidentally coincided with my stubborn refusal to help family. "I couldn't sleep last night, sweetheart," she would whisper into the phone during my lunch breaks at work. "The stress of Victoria's situation is just eating me alive. I keep thinking about how disappointed your grandmother would be to see us so divided over something that should bring us together." She would pause dramatically, letting out carefully timed sighs that sounded rehearsed. "The doctor says stress like this could trigger another episode with my heart condition. But I suppose my health isn't as important as your selfishness." My father took a different approach, abandoning any pretense of subtlety in favor of aggressive intimidation tactics that reminded me why I'd been so eager to move out after high school. His voicemails were filled with demands about stepping up to family responsibility and honoring the sacrifices we made raising you. According to his revised version of history, every meal they'd provided, every roof they'd put over my head, every basic necessity of childhood had been an investment that I now owed back with interest. But it was Victoria who truly excelled at the art of playing victim while simultaneously orchestrating the campaign against me. Her social media became a carefully curated exhibition of wounded sisterhood, filled with cryptic posts about family betrayal and sisters who abandon you in your greatest time of need. She shared throwback photos of us as children with captions like, "When you think someone will always have your back but they choose money over love," and "praying for my sister's heart to soften during this difficult time." The extended family recruitment began within a week of my refusal. Aunt Margaret called first, her voice dripping with disappointment as she explained how shocked and saddened she was to hear about my unreasonable behavior. According to the family telephone tree, I had become the villain who was destroying Victoria's dreams out of pure spite and jealousy. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt compelled to reach out with advice about family values and what really matters in life. Uncle Robert, who had never shown interest in anyone's financial situation before, called to lecture me about investing in family relationships and understanding that some things are more important than money. Cousin Jennifer, who had eloped to Vegas specifically to avoid wedding expenses, somehow found the moral authority to tell me that family comes first and true sisters sacrifice for each other. Each conversation followed the same script, suggesting that my parents had provided talking points to ensure consistent messaging across all family members. The most devastating discovery came when I received a call from the wedding venue coordinator, congratulating me on my generous gift and confirming the deposit that had been made in my name. When I explained that I had never agreed to pay for anything, she seemed confused and mentioned that my parents had provided my social security number and employment information as financial guarantees. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I realized they had already begun forging documents and making commitments using my identity. Similar calls followed from caterers, photographers, and florists, all thanking me for my wonderful support of Victoria's special day. Each vendor had contracts with forged signatures that bore a suspicious resemblance to my handwriting, but just different enough to maintain plausible deniability. When I confronted my parents about these unauthorized agreements, they acted shocked and hurt that I would accuse them of anything improper. We were just trying to help secure the best vendors before they got booked, my mother explained with wounded innocence. We told them you were handling the finances, and they needed some basic information for their records. Nobody forced you to sign anything, dear. These are verbal agreements based on your promises to pay. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost doubted my own memory of never making any such promises. Derek's involvement escalated the situation from family drama to potential legal nightmare. During what was supposed to be a peaceful conversation at a coffee shop, he calmly explained that canceling the wedding at this point would result in significant financial penalties that someone would need to pay. "Look, Samantha, I get that this is a lot of money," he said with the condescending tone of someone explaining simple math to a child. "But contracts have been signed, deposits have been made, and vendors have blocked out dates. If you back out now, somebody's going to be liable for the damages." The legal threat became explicit when he slid a folder across the table containing copies of all the forged contracts. "My lawyer says that backing out of a verbal family agreement like this could be considered fraud, especially since vendors have already incurred expenses based on your commitments. We're not trying to hurt anyone here, but Victoria shouldn't have to suffer because you changed your mind about helping family." The casual way he delivered this threat, as if he were discussing weekend plans, made it clear that this had been planned from the beginning. My parents delivered the second major attack during what they called a family intervention at their house. When I arrived, thinking we were going to have a rational discussion about the situation, I found myself facing a coordinated presentation complete with charts showing my income, expense estimates, and a payment plan they had devised without my input. "We've done the math, sweetheart," my father announced proudly, as if he had solved a complex problem. "You can easily afford this if you just adjust your lifestyle for a few months." Their adjustments included canceling my gym membership, eating only rice and beans for 6 months, moving to a smaller apartment, selling my car and using public transportation, and withdrawing money from my retirement account early despite the penalties. The fact that they had researched my financial situation so thoroughly, without my knowledge or consent, felt like a violation that went beyond mere nosiness into actual stalking territory. "If you really can't come up with the full amount immediately," my mother added sweetly, "we've already talked to several payday loan companies who would be happy to help bridge the gap. Family is worth a little temporary debt, don't you think?" The suggestion that I should destroy my financial future with predatory loans for Victoria's wedding fantasy was so outrageous that I wondered if they had completely lost touch with reality. The emotional manipulation reached a crescendo when they threatened permanent family exile if I continued to prioritize money over love. "We raised you better than this," my father said, his voice heavy with manufactured disappointment. "If you can't support your sister when she needs you most, then maybe you've forgotten what it means to be a Brooks. Maybe you'd be happier finding a new family who shares your selfish values." The threat of complete abandonment, delivered with such calculated cruelty, was designed to trigger every childhood fear of rejection and isolation I'd ever experienced. The situation spiraled into nightmare territory when my parents decided that destroying my professional reputation would somehow convince me to fund Victoria's wedding. I first became aware of their workplace interference when my supervisor, Janet, approached me with genuine concern during a busy Tuesday morning shift. "Samantha, I received a very troubling phone call from someone claiming to be your mother," she said, pulling me aside into the break room. "She seemed to think you were having some kind of mental health crisis and might be a danger to patients." My blood turned to ice as Janet explained the conversation. According to my mother's carefully crafted story, I had been exhibiting erratic behavior, making irrational financial decisions, and showing signs of a complete psychological breakdown. She had expressed deep concern about my ability to perform my duties safely and suggested that the hospital might want to consider placing me on temporary leave until I could get the help I desperately needed. "She mentioned something about you refusing to help with a family emergency and becoming violent when confronted about it," Janet continued, her expression growing more worried. "She said you'd been talking about hurting yourself and possibly others. I'm required to report these kinds of concerns to administration, but I wanted to talk to you first because this doesn't sound like the Samantha I know." The fact that my own mother would jeopardize my career with fabricated mental health claims felt like the ultimate betrayal. The hospital's response was swift and terrifying. Human Resources scheduled an immediate meeting to discuss the allegations against me, and I found myself sitting across from administrators trying to defend my sanity to people who had never questioned my competence before. "We take all reports of potential mental health issues very seriously," the HR director explained, reviewing a file that seemed impossibly thick for a situation that had started just days earlier. "Your mother provided very specific examples of concerning behavior, including paranoid delusions about family members stealing your identity and irrational anger over normal family financial requests," she continued, reading from notes that painted me as an unstable, dangerous individual. "She also mentioned that you've been isolating yourself from family support systems and making threats about what you might do if forced to participate in family obligations." While I was dealing with the professional crisis, Victoria launched her social media assault with the precision of a military campaign. Her Instagram account became a daily showcase of wounded sisterhood, featuring carefully staged photos of her crying over wedding magazines with captions like, "When your dreams are crushed by the person who should love you most." She posted screenshots of our family photos with my face crossed out and words like betrayal and abandonment written across them. The Facebook posts were even more manipulative, featuring long, rambling stories about our childhood that painted me as a jealous, resentful sister who had always tried to steal attention from her sweet, innocent younger sibling. According to Victoria's revisionist history, I had been bullying and tormenting her for years, and my refusal to pay for her wedding was just the latest example of my pattern of abuse and control. "I keep asking myself what I did wrong to deserve this treatment from someone I've loved and looked up to my entire life," read one particularly manipulative post that received hundreds of sympathetic comments. "All I wanted was to share the happiest day of my life with my big sister, but she's chosen money over family. I'm trying to forgive her, but the pain is almost unbearable. Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time." The community response was swift and devastating. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, and acquaintances who had only heard Victoria's version of events began treating me like a pariah. The grocery store checkout clerk who had always been friendly suddenly avoided eye contact. My hairstylist canceled my appointment without explanation. Former classmates who followed Victoria on social media started sending me private messages expressing their disappointment and concern about my behavior. The financial sabotage began appearing almost simultaneously with the character assassination campaign. My credit card statement started showing charges I had never made, all for wedding-related expenses like dress fittings, cake tastings, and venue decorations. When I called to dispute the charges, the vendors insisted they had verbal authorization from me and produced credit card information that somehow matched my accounts despite my never providing it to them. My bank called to alert me about unusual activity on my checking account, including several large transfers to wedding vendors and a payday loan company I had never heard of. When I rushed to the bank to investigate, they showed me applications and agreements bearing signatures that looked suspiciously like my handwriting, but with subtle differences that suggested forgery. The applications included all the correct personal information, social security number, and employment details, the bank manager explained apologetically. "Without a police report for identity theft, there's very little we can do to reverse the transactions." The most shocking discovery came when I received legal papers served at my apartment by a professional process server who seemed almost apologetic about the situation. The lawsuit claimed that I had entered into a verbal contract with my family to pay for Victoria's wedding expenses and was now attempting to breach that agreement after vendors had already provided services based on my promises and financial guarantees. The legal documents included affidavits from my parents, Victoria, Derek, and even some extended family members, all swearing under oath that I had explicitly agreed to cover all wedding expenses during multiple family meetings. They had dates, times, and detailed descriptions of conversations that supposedly took place, painting a picture of someone who had made firm commitments and was now trying to back out for selfish reasons. The defendant repeatedly assured the family that she would cover all wedding expenses as her gift to her beloved sister, read one particularly creative passage. She encouraged the family to spare no expense in creating the perfect celebration and promised that money was no object when it came to her sister's happiness. The defendant's sudden reversal and refusal to honor her commitments has caused significant financial and emotional damage to all parties involved. Derek had hired what appeared to be a legitimate attorney who specialized in contract disputes, suggesting that significant money had been invested in this legal strategy. The lawsuit demanded not only the $50,000 for wedding expenses but also additional damages for emotional distress and reputational harm caused by my breach of family trust and financial obligations. The community destruction campaign reached its peak when Victoria organized what she called a prayer circle for our broken family situation. She invited neighbors, family friends, and church members to gather in my parents' backyard for an evening of spiritual support and healing energy directed toward resolving our conflict. Photos from the event showed dozens of people holding candles and bowing their heads in prayer while Victoria sobbed dramatically in the center of the circle. The local newspaper even picked up the story, running a feature about community rallies around bride whose sister abandoned wedding dreams. The article painted Victoria as a tragic figure whose simple desire for family support had been crushed by a selfish, money-obsessed sister who valued financial security over family bonds. My name was mentioned prominently, along with my profession and workplace, essentially marking me as the villain in our small town's most dramatic family feud. By the end of that month, I felt completely isolated and under siege from every direction. My professional reputation was hanging by a thread, my financial accounts were compromised, my personal relationships were strained, and my own family had declared war on my sanity and stability. The psychological pressure was so intense that I began doubting my own memory of events, wondering if maybe I really had agreed to something that I somehow forgot about during moments of stress or exhaustion. The psychological warfare escalated to unbearable levels when my parents decided to weaponize religion against me, recruiting our family's longtime pastor for what they called an intervention guided by Christian principles. Pastor Williams, a man I had respected since childhood, arrived at my apartment on a Sunday evening with a grave expression and a well-prepared speech about honoring thy father and mother and the biblical importance of family sacrifice. Samantha, your parents have shared their heartbreak about this situation, and I feel called by God to help heal this family rift, he began, settling into my living room chair with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The Bible teaches us that love means putting others' needs before our own, especially when it comes to family. Your sister's wedding is a sacred celebration that deserves your support, both financially and emotionally. The religious manipulation was particularly painful because Pastor Williams had been a positive influence during my troubled teenage years, providing guidance when my parents seemed too busy managing Victoria's drama to notice my struggles. Now he was using our shared faith history to pressure me into financial submission, quoting scripture about generosity and family obligations while conveniently ignoring verses about parents not provoking their children to anger or the importance of honest dealing. I've spoken with several members of our congregation who are deeply concerned about your spiritual well-being, he continued, pulling out a folder filled with what appeared to be letters and prayer requests. They've been praying for your heart to soften and for you to remember the Christian values we raised you with. Money comes and goes, my dear, but family relationships are eternal. Don't let temporary financial concerns destroy something precious that God has given you. The church member recruitment campaign that followed was devastating to my remaining social connections in the community. People who had known me for years suddenly felt entitled to offer unsolicited advice about my spiritual condition and my responsibilities as a Christian daughter and sister. The church bulletin included a special prayer request for a family struggling with financial disagreements that everyone understood referred to our situation. Mrs. Henderson, who had taught my Sunday school class as a child, cornered me after service with tears in her eyes and a lecture about how disappointed she was in my behavior. I remember when you were such a generous, loving little girl, she said, shaking her head sadly. I keep praying that the Lord will remind you of who you really are inside and help you do the right thing for your family. The situation became even more surreal when Victoria announced that she was pregnant, timing the revelation perfectly to maximize emotional impact and create additional pressure for me to fund not only her wedding but also upcoming expenses related to her growing family. The pregnancy announcement came during a family gathering that I had reluctantly attended, hoping to find some reasonable middle ground for resolving our conflict. "Derek and I have some wonderful news to share," Victoria said, her hand resting dramatically on her still flat stomach while tears of joy streamed down her face. "We're going to have a baby. The wedding isn't just about celebrating our love anymore, it's about creating a stable foundation for our growing family." This makes Samantha's support even more important because we're not just planning a party, we're building a future for an innocent child. The manipulation was so obvious that it would have been comical if it hadn't been so effective on my parents and extended family. Suddenly, my refusal to pay for the wedding wasn't just about disappointing Victoria, it was about depriving an unborn child of the stable, loving foundation that apparently could only be provided through an expensive wedding celebration. Derek seized the pregnancy announcement as an opportunity to increase his demands exponentially. "Obviously, this changes everything," he said, pulling out a revised budget that included not only wedding expenses but also baby shower costs, nursery furniture, medical bills, and a family stability fund that would cover their living expenses for the first year of parenthood. The new total had grown from $50,000 to nearly $75,000, and my family obligations now extended far beyond a single wedding celebration. "Samantha needs to understand that this isn't just about one day anymore," Derek explained with the confidence of someone who had successfully manipulated multiple generations of my family. "This is about ensuring that her niece or nephew has everything they need for a healthy, happy start in life. The wedding is just the beginning of her investment in our family's future success." The fourth major attack came when my parents threatened to contest my grandmother's will, claiming that she had been suffering from dementia when she left me her house and savings account. According to their new narrative, Grandmother Brooks had been manipulated and confused when she updated her will to leave everything to me instead of dividing it equally among all family members. "It's not about the money, sweetheart," my mother explained with fake sweetness while delivering legal papers that challenged the validity of every decision my grandmother had made during her final years. "It's about what's fair and what Grandma really would have wanted if she had been thinking clearly. She loved Victoria just as much as she loved you, and she would want her inheritance used to support the whole family's happiness." The legal challenge to my inheritance was particularly devastating because it attacked the one source of financial security I had beyond my job. My grandmother's house represented my future stability, a place where I could live without rent payments and eventually build real wealth. The savings account she had left me was my emergency fund, my protection against unexpected medical bills or job loss, my peace of mind in an uncertain world. "We have medical records showing that Grandma was experiencing significant cognitive decline during the period when she updated her will," my father added, presenting documents that painted my beloved grandmother as a confused, easily manipulated elderly woman rather than the sharp, independent person I had known and loved. "Our attorney says we have a strong case for proving undue influence and getting the inheritance redistributed the way it should have been in the first place. The legal fees for defending my grandmother's will began draining my savings account at an alarming rate. Every document required review by my attorney, every medical record needed analysis by expert witnesses, and every family member's testimony had to be challenged through depositions and cross-examinations. The cost of justice was becoming almost as expensive as simply giving in to their demands. My health began deteriorating under the constant stress and psychological pressure. Panic attacks started hitting during work shifts, forcing me to excuse myself from patient care situations that required steady hands and clear thinking. Insomnia became a nightly battle as my mind raced through endless scenarios of financial ruin, professional destruction, and family annihilation. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal family meeting where Derek presented what he called final terms for resolving the situation. "Look, Samantha, this has gone on long enough," he said, spreading documents across my parents' dining table like a general planning a military campaign. "You can either pay for everything we've discussed, or we can continue with the legal proceedings and let the courts decide what you owe. But one way or another, you're going to fulfill your obligations to this family." The room felt like a courtroom where I was simultaneously the defendant, the evidence, and the hoped-for source of restitution. My parents sat like judges, Victoria played the role of wounded victim, and Derek acted as prosecutor, presenting his case for why my financial submission was not only reasonable but legally required. "We've been more than patient," my mother added, her voice taking on that cold, final tone that I remembered from childhood punishments. "We've given you time to come to your senses and do the right thing. But if you continue to choose selfishness over family, then you'll have to live with the consequences. We can't force you to love your sister, but we can make sure you honor your commitments." That night, sitting alone in my apartment surrounded by legal documents, medical bills, and financial statements showing my dwindling resources, I came closer to complete surrender than at any other point in the entire ordeal. The exhaustion was overwhelming, the isolation was crushing, and the constant attacks had worn down my resistance to almost nothing. For a brief, terrifying moment, I seriously considered emptying my savings account, borrowing against my grandmother's house, and giving them whatever they wanted just to make the nightmare end. Just when I thought I was completely alone in this battle, salvation arrived from the most unexpected source. Patricia Summers, Victoria's former college roommate, contacted me through LinkedIn with a message that would change everything. "I need to talk to you about your sister. There are things you need to know about her past that your family obviously doesn't want you to discover. Can we meet somewhere private?" Patricia's involvement began when she saw Victoria's social media campaign and recognized the same manipulation tactics that had destroyed several friendships during their college years. "I couldn't believe she was pulling the same scams on her own family," Patricia explained when we met at a coffee shop across town from where anyone might recognize us. "Victoria has a long history of creating financial emergencies and then pressuring friends and family to bail her out through elaborate guilt trips and emotional manipulation." The stories Patricia shared painted a disturbing picture of my sister's character that explained so much about our family's dysfunctional dynamics. During college, Victoria had convinced 3 different roommates to cover her share of rent by claiming family emergencies that never existed. She had borrowed thousands of dollars from friends for medical expenses that turned out to be shopping sprees and vacation trips. Most shocking of all, she had run similar wedding scams on 2 previous boyfriends, collecting money for engagements that were broken off after she had extracted maximum financial benefit. "The pregnancy announcement is probably fake too," Patricia said, showing me screenshots of Victoria's previous social media posts where she had used the same pregnancy manipulation tactic to extract money from friends and family during other financial crises. "She's done this exact same thing before, complete with dramatic announcements and emotional appeals about building a future for an innocent child. When people started asking for proof, she would claim miscarriage and use that for another round of sympathy donations." Patricia had documentation of Victoria's pattern of financial fraud, including text messages, emails, and social media posts that showed identical language and tactics being used across multiple scam operations. "I started saving evidence when I realized she was systematically targeting everyone in our friend group," she explained. "I knew eventually someone would need proof of what she was really doing." The investigation into Derek's background revealed even more disturbing information. Patricia's current boyfriend worked in law enforcement and had run a basic background check that showed Derek's real name was actually Marcus Thompson, and he had outstanding warrants in 3 different states for wedding-related fraud schemes. His successful entrepreneur persona was completely fabricated. He was actually unemployed and living off money stolen from previous victims. "He's been running this exact same scam across the country," Patricia's boyfriend explained during a clandestine meeting in an empty parking lot. "He finds vulnerable women with wealthy families, gets engaged quickly, pressure the families into paying for expensive weddings, then disappears with the money before the ceremony actually takes place. Your sister is either a willing accomplice or another victim, but either way, your family is being systematically robbed by professional criminals." The most shocking revelation came when Patricia introduced me to her friend Jennifer, a forensic accountant who specialized in family financial fraud cases. Jennifer's analysis of my financial records uncovered a pattern of unauthorized access and manipulation that went back much further than the current wedding crisis. Someone has been monitoring your accounts and gradually extracting small amounts of money for years, she explained, showing me printouts that made my blood run cold. The theft started when you were in nursing school, Jennifer continued, pointing to monthly withdrawals that I had never authorized but were too small to notice during those financially stressful years. Whoever was doing this had complete access to your banking information, social security number, and employment records. They were basically treating your accounts like their personal piggy bank, taking just enough to avoid detection but building up to substantial amounts over time. The total theft over the past 5 years amounted to nearly $30,000, money that had been gradually siphoned from my accounts through a combination of unauthorized transfers, fraudulent credit applications, and forged check withdrawals. The evidence suggested that my parents had been systematically stealing from me while simultaneously guilt-tripping me about not providing enough financial support to the family. This explains why you've always felt like you were struggling financially despite having a decent income, Jennifer said, reviewing my spending patterns and comparing them to my actual earnings. They've been sabotaging your financial stability for years, probably to keep you dependent and unable to resist their demands for money. It's a classic pattern in financial abuse cases involving family members. The discovery that my own parents had been stealing from me for years while demanding more financial sacrifices was devastating, but it also provided the clarity I needed to understand that this wasn't really about Victoria's wedding. This was about a family system built on exploitation and manipulation, where my role was to provide financial support while receiving emotional abuse in return. Patricia's support network expanded to include Marcus Williams, the attorney who had been secretly helping my parents with their legal strategy against me. Patricia's research had uncovered that Marcus was actually Victoria's former boyfriend from high school, and his involvement in the family legal strategy represented a massive conflict of interest that could invalidate everything they had done. Marcus has been feeding your family legal strategies and inside information about your financial situation, Patricia explained, showing me phone records and email exchanges that proved the conspiracy. He's been using his position as a lawyer to help them build their case against you while pretending to provide neutral legal advice. It's completely unethical and probably illegal. The evidence against Marcus included recordings of phone conversations where he coached my parents on how to forge documents convincingly, advised them on which laws to break without getting caught, and provided strategic guidance on how to maximize psychological pressure while minimizing their own legal liability. His involvement transformed the situation from family drama into professional criminal conspiracy. Jennifer's forensic analysis also revealed that my parents had been using my stolen money to fund Victoria's lifestyle for years, essentially forcing me to subsidize the same golden child treatment that had made my own childhood so difficult. They've been taking your money and giving it to your sister, then guilt-tripping you about not being generous enough to family, Jennifer summarized. It's psychological torture funded by your own stolen resources. The foundation for fighting back was finally in place, but Patricia emphasized the importance of strategic planning before confronting the criminals who happened to be my family members. You can't just charge in with accusations and evidence, she warned. These people are sophisticated manipulators who will try to turn everything around and make you look like the crazy, vindictive one. We need to build an airtight case and then spring the trap when they least expect it. With Patricia's help, I began documenting every interaction with my family, recording phone conversations where legally permitted, and building a comprehensive file of evidence that would protect me from their inevitable counterattacks. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies who understood the true scope of what I was dealing with and the skills necessary to fight back effectively. The transformation from isolated victim to strategic fighter felt empowering in a way I had never experienced before. Instead of passively absorbing abuse and manipulation, I was now actively gathering intelligence and preparing for a counteroffensive that would expose the truth about my family's criminal behavior and protect other potential victims from falling into the same trap. Armed with months of evidence and a support team of professionals, I decided it was time to turn the tables on my family's criminal enterprise. The first phase of my counterattack began with a carefully orchestrated public confrontation designed to expose their lies in front of the entire church community that they had manipulated into supporting their cause. Sunday morning service became the perfect venue for revealing the truth about Victoria's pregnancy deception. I waited until Pastor Williams called for prayer requests and community announcements before standing up and requesting permission to address the congregation that had been praying for our family reconciliation for months. "I want to thank everyone who has been praying for my family during this difficult time," I began, my voice steady and clear as I looked out at the faces of people who had been judging me based on lies and manipulation. "I especially want to thank those who reached out with concerns about my spiritual well-being and my obligations as a Christian daughter and sister. Your care and concern motivated me to seek truth and justice in this situation." The church fell silent as I pulled out the medical records that proved Victoria's pregnancy was completely fabricated. "I recently discovered that my sister has been lying about being pregnant in order to manipulate this community's sympathy and support for her wedding fundraising efforts. These documents from her own doctor confirm that she has never been pregnant during the time period when she claimed to be carrying Derek's child." Victoria's face went white as I continued reading from the medical records, but her practiced victim act kicked in immediately. She started crying and stammering about miscarriage and private family matters, but I was prepared for her deflection tactics. "I also want to share some information about Derek, the man my sister claims to be marrying," I continued, pulling out the police reports and criminal background information that Patricia's boyfriend had helped me obtain legally. "His real name is Marcus Thompson, and he's wanted in 3 states for wedding fraud schemes identical to what he's been running on our family. The engagement is fake, the business success is fake, and the entire relationship appears to be a criminal operation designed to steal money from our family." The congregation's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Gasps and whispers filled the sanctuary as people began to understand that they had been manipulated into supporting a sophisticated fraud scheme. Pastor Williams tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Victoria and Derek's carefully constructed image had been completely destroyed in front of everyone who mattered in their social circle. My parents' response was swift and vicious, but I was ready for their counterattack. When they stood up to defend Victoria and attack my lies and slander, I pulled out the financial records that proved their years of theft from my accounts. "I want this community to understand what kind of people they've been supporting," I said, holding up bank statements and forensic accounting reports. "My parents have been stealing money from my accounts for years while simultaneously demanding that I provide more financial support to the family. They've taken over $30,000 from me without permission while guilt-tripping me about not being generous enough to help Victoria." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Jennifer had provided clear, professional documentation of every unauthorized transaction, every forged signature, and every instance of identity theft that my parents had committed. The congregation could see the patterns of fraud spelled out in black and white, with dates, amounts, and methods clearly documented. The most damaging revelation came when I revealed Marcus the attorney's conflict of interest and unethical involvement in their legal strategy against me. The lawyer who has been helping my parents sue me is actually Victoria's former boyfriend and has been providing them with illegal advice on how to commit fraud without getting caught, I announced, showing the phone records and email exchanges that Patricia had helped me obtain. These recorded conversations prove that Marcus coached my parents on document forgery, advised them on identity theft techniques, and helped them develop strategies for psychologically manipulating me into financial submission. This isn't family drama, this is organized crime involving multiple conspirators and victims. The church board members were visibly shaken as they realized how completely they had been deceived by people they had trusted and supported for years. Several members immediately approached me after the service to apologize for their judgment and offer support for pursuing legal action against the criminals who had manipulated their congregation. Derek's arrest happened that same afternoon when police officers arrived at my parents' house with warrants based on the evidence I had provided to law enforcement. The fraud charges included identity theft, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and multiple counts of obtaining money under false pretenses. His arrest confirmed everything I had revealed about his criminal background and validated my claims in front of anyone who might have still doubted the truth. Victoria's emotional breakdown when Derek was led away in handcuffs was spectacular and genuine for perhaps the first time in years. Without her criminal partner and exposed as a fraud in front of her entire social network, she finally faced consequences for her manipulative behavior. Her fake pregnancy claim unraveled completely when police required medical examination as part of their fraud investigation. The civil lawsuit I filed against my parents and Victoria sought recovery of all stolen money plus damages for emotional distress, defamation, and intentional infliction of psychological trauma. Jennifer's forensic accounting provided the foundation for calculating exact amounts owed, while Patricia's documentation established the pattern of manipulation and abuse that had enabled the financial crimes. My workplace vindication came when Human Resources reviewed the evidence of my parents' false reports about my mental health and issued a formal apology for questioning my competence based on fabricated claims. The hospital administration was so appalled by the extent of the deception that they offered me a promotion to head nurse practitioner and included a commendation letter in my permanent employment file. The community response was swift and decisive in my favor once the truth became public knowledge. People who had avoided me based on Victoria's lies reached out to apologize and offer support. Local businesses that had been pressured to donate money or services for the fake wedding demanded refunds and threatened their own legal action against the fraud scheme. The media coverage of the elaborate family fraud operation attracted attention from investigative reporters who were interested in the psychological and legal aspects of family financial abuse. My story became a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing manipulation tactics and protecting personal financial information from family members who might exploit trust for criminal gain. The most satisfying moment came when my parents finally faced the reality that their criminal behavior had consequences they couldn't manipulate or escape. With their lawyer facing ethics violations and potential criminal charges, their financial crimes documented by professional forensic analysis, and their reputation in the community completely destroyed, they could no longer maintain the illusion that they were victims of my selfishness. The power dynamic that had defined our family relationships for decades was permanently reversed. Instead of being the victim who absorbed abuse while providing financial support, I was now the person with legal power, community support, and moral authority. My parents and Victoria had to face the consequences of their choices while I moved forward with the backing of justice and truth. The legal consequences for my family's criminal enterprise unfolded with the systematic precision of justice finally catching up with years of sophisticated fraud. The district attorney's office, armed with Jennifer's forensic accounting evidence and Patricia's documented proof of systematic manipulation, filed comprehensive criminal charges against all the conspirators involved in what they classified as organized family fraud. My parents faced multiple felony counts including identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and systematic financial exploitation of a family member. The prosecution's case was strengthened by the recorded conversations showing their deliberate planning and coordination with Marcus the attorney, demonstrating that their criminal behavior was premeditated rather than impulsive family conflict. This case represents one of the most elaborate family fraud schemes our office has encountered, the lead prosecutor explained during a press conference that attracted regional media attention. The defendants systematically exploited family relationships and community trust to steal money and manipulate victims through psychological abuse. The sophistication of their operations suggests years of practice and multiple potential victims beyond the immediate family. Victoria's charges included filing false police reports, fraud by deception, conspiracy to commit theft, and using fabricated medical conditions to obtain money and sympathy under false pretenses. The fake pregnancy scheme became a central element of the prosecution's case, demonstrating her willingness to exploit even potential children as tools for financial manipulation. Derek, whose real identity as Marcus Thompson was now fully exposed, faced the most serious charges due to his multi-state fraud operation and the discovery of additional victims who came forward after news coverage of his arrest. Federal authorities became involved when investigation revealed that his wedding fraud schemes had crossed state lines and involved interstate transportation of stolen money. Mr. Thompson operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable families across multiple states, the FBI agent leading the federal investigation explained. His method involved identifying families with financial resources, infiltrating through romantic relationships, and then coordinating with local accomplices to extract maximum money before disappearing. The Brooks family case helped us connect him to at least 12 similar fraud operations nationwide. Marcus the attorney faced immediate suspension from the State Bar Association pending investigation of ethics violations that included conflict of interest, providing legal advice for criminal activities, and betraying client confidentiality. The evidence of his recorded conversations coaching my parents on fraud techniques was so damaging that he also faced criminal charges for conspiracy and aiding criminal enterprise. Attorney Williams violated every principle of legal ethics by using his professional knowledge to help clients commit crimes against third parties, the State Bar Disciplinary Council announced. His license to practice law has been suspended indefinitely, and we are cooperating with criminal prosecutors to ensure full accountability for his actions. The civil lawsuit recovery exceeded my expectations when Jennifer's forensic accounting revealed additional hidden assets that my parents had accumulated through years of financial manipulation. Beyond the $30,000 stolen from my accounts, investigation uncovered another $40,000 in property and investments that they had acquired using money extracted from extended family members through similar guilt manipulation tactics. The defendants established a pattern of financial exploitation that extended far beyond the immediate victim, Jennifer explained during her expert witness testimony. They systematically identified and manipulated multiple family members and community connections to fund a lifestyle that their legitimate income could not support. The total financial damage approaches 6 figures when including all identified victims. My parents lost their house when the court ordered restitution payments that exceeded their legitimate assets. The forced sale of their property, along with seizure of vehicles and investment accounts, provided funds for compensating victims while leaving them to face the reality of living within their actual means for the first time in decades. The media coverage expanded beyond local news when national consumer protection organizations identified my case as an example of emerging trends in family financial fraud. Television news programs featured interviews with me and Patricia discussing warning signs that viewers should watch for in their own family relationships. Family financial abuse is often overlooked because we assume that relatives have our best interests at heart, I explained during a segment that aired on a national morning show. But the most effective manipulators are often those closest to us, who understand our emotional vulnerabilities and know how to exploit our desire for family harmony. The community reckoning was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire ordeal. Church members who had been manipulated into pressuring me about family obligations organized a formal apology service where they acknowledged their role in enabling abuse and committed to more careful consideration before taking sides in family conflicts. We were deceived by skilled manipulators who exploited our desire to help families in crisis, Pastor Williams admitted during his public apology sermon. Our failure to investigate the truth before judging Samantha caused additional harm to someone who was already being victimized by criminal behavior. We pledge to learn from this experience and provide better support for abuse victims in the future. Former family friends who had avoided me based on Victoria's lies reached out with heartfelt apologies and offers of renewed friendship. The social isolation that had been so painful during the worst phases of their manipulation campaign was replaced by a stronger, more authentic community of people who valued truth and justice over superficial family loyalty. Extended family members who had been recruited to pressure me about family values were horrified to learn how they had been used as unwitting accomplices in criminal fraud. Several cousins and aunts contacted me to share their own suspicions about Victoria's financial requests over the years and to apologize for not speaking up when they noticed inconsistencies in her stories. The workplace vindication was complete when the hospital administration not only cleared my record of all false allegations but also commended me for my professionalism in handling an extremely difficult personal situation. The promotion to head nurse practitioner came with increased salary and responsibilities that reflected their confidence in my character and capabilities. Samantha demonstrated remarkable strength and integrity throughout this ordeal, my supervisor Janet explained in the commendation letter that was added to my personnel file. Despite facing significant personal attacks and professional challenges, she maintained the highest standards of patient care and ethical behavior. Her response to adversity exemplifies the kind of character we value in our leadership team. The most meaningful vindication came from patients and colleagues who had witnessed my dedication during the most difficult phases of the family crisis. Several patients wrote letters to hospital administration praising my compassionate care even when they could see I was dealing with personal stress, demonstrating that my professional integrity had remained intact despite the psychological warfare being waged against me. The complete reversal of power dynamics in our family relationships was both satisfying and sobering. My parents, who had spent years using emotional manipulation and financial pressure to control my behavior, now had to communicate through attorneys and court-mandated supervision. Victoria, who had built her entire identity around being the favored child who deserved special treatment, faced the reality of supporting herself without family subsidies or manipulation tactics. The criminal justice system's validation that their behavior constituted serious crimes rather than simple family disagreement provided the external confirmation I needed to trust my own perceptions and judgments. Years of gaslighting and manipulation had left me questioning my own memory and sanity, but the legal system's thorough investigation proved that my experiences had been real and my resistance had been justified. The final court proceedings brought a sense of closure that had seemed impossible during the darkest phases of my family's criminal campaign. Judge Richardson, who presided over both the criminal cases and my civil lawsuit, delivered sentences that reflected the serious nature of systematic family fraud and the lasting damage inflicted on victims through years of manipulation and theft. My parents each received 18-month prison sentences followed by 3 years of supervised probation, during which they would be required to make monthly restitution payments until all victims were fully compensated. The judge emphasized that their age and previous clean records were balanced against the sophistication and duration of their criminal enterprise. The defendants exploited the most sacred relationships in human society, family bonds and community trust, to commit systematic fraud over multiple years, Judge Richardson explained during sentencing. Their manipulation of religious institutions and community organizations to pressure their victim demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that demands serious consequences. Victoria's sentence of 12 months in county jail with 5 years probation reflected her cooperation with prosecutors in providing evidence against Derek and Marcus, as well as her testimony that helped convict co-conspirators in the broader fraud network. Her restitution obligations would continue long after her incarceration, ensuring ongoing accountability for the financial damage she had caused. Derek received the longest sentence, 8 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release with strict monitoring of all financial activities. Federal prosecutors successfully argued that his multi-state fraud operation represented a threat to vulnerable families across the country and required significant incarceration to protect future victims. Marcus, the attorney, faced both criminal conviction and complete professional ruin when the State Bar Association permanently revoked his license to practice law. His 18-month sentence included specific provisions requiring cooperation with ongoing investigations of other attorneys who might be providing similar criminal assistance to fraud operations. The civil lawsuit resolution provided full financial recovery plus punitive damages that reflected the court's determination to discourage similar family fraud schemes. Jennifer's forensic accounting had identified assets hidden in various accounts and investments, enabling recovery that exceeded the original theft amounts by enough to compensate for years of financial damage and emotional trauma. My grandmother's house, which had been clouded by my parents' fraudulent inheritance challenge, was officially confirmed as my sole property with clear title that could never again be contested. The legal victory validated my grandmother's judgment and protected the financial security she had intended to provide for my future independence from family manipulation. The restitution payments from my parents' asset liquidation provided enough money to pay off my student loans completely, eliminating the monthly debt payments that had kept me financially vulnerable to their pressure tactics. The additional settlement funds created an emergency fund that would protect me from ever again being forced into financial dependence on manipulative family members. The professional vindication continued when my promotion to head nurse practitioner was accompanied by recognition from the State Nursing Association for maintaining the highest ethical standards under extreme personal adversity. The award ceremony provided public acknowledgement that my professional integrity had never been legitimately in question. My personal life began flourishing in ways I had never imagined possible when the constant stress and manipulation were finally removed. The relationship with Detective James Morrison, Patricia's brother who had helped investigate Derek's criminal background, developed naturally into a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than financial obligation or emotional manipulation. It's refreshing to be with someone who understands the difference between healthy family relationships and criminal behavior, James told me during one of our early conversations about my experiences. My work in fraud investigation has shown me how rare it is for victims to fight back successfully against family manipulation. Your strength and integrity are remarkable. Our relationship provided a model for what healthy family dynamics could look like, with James's relatives treating me as an equal partner rather than a source of financial support or emotional validation. Holiday gatherings with his family demonstrated that it was possible to have close relationships without exploitation, manipulation, or psychological warfare. The scholarship fund I established for nursing students from difficult family backgrounds became a meaningful way to transform my painful experiences into positive opportunities for others facing similar challenges. The annual awards provided both financial assistance and mentorship for students who understood the value of professional independence and personal integrity. The Samantha Brooks Nursing Scholarship represents hope for students who might otherwise be trapped by family financial manipulation, explained the dean of the nursing school during the first award ceremony. By supporting students who demonstrate both academic excellence and personal strength, this fund helps build a profession filled with nurses who understand the importance of protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. The media attention surrounding my case led to speaking opportunities at conferences focused on family financial abuse, elder exploitation, and fraud prevention. Sharing my story became a way to educate others about recognizing manipulation tactics and protecting themselves from similar victimization. Family financial abuse is often hidden behind cultural expectations about obligation and loyalty, I explained during a keynote speech at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. Victims are reluctant to report crimes committed by relatives because society teaches us that family relationships should be preserved at any cost. But healthy families don't require financial exploitation to maintain emotional connections. The speaking engagements also connected me with other survivors of family financial abuse, creating a network of mutual support that helped combat the isolation and self-doubt that such manipulation creates. Learning that my experiences were part of a broader pattern of family dysfunction helped validate my decisions and strengthen my resolve to maintain healthy boundaries. The complete transformation of my community reputation from selfish daughter to fraud victim who fought back successfully provided powerful validation that truth eventually prevails over manipulation. People who had previously avoided me based on Victoria's lies now approached me with respect and admiration for my courage in challenging criminal behavior regardless of family relationships. The church community, which had been weaponized against me during the worst phases of my family's manipulation campaign, became a source of genuine support once the truth was revealed. Pastor Williams's replacement implemented new policies for evaluating family conflict situations to prevent similar manipulation of congregational sympathy in the future. Samantha's experience taught our entire congregation important lessons about the difference between family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior, the new pastor explained during a sermon about healthy relationships and personal boundaries. True Christian love requires protecting vulnerable people from exploitation, even when the perpetrators are family members who claim to deserve unconditional support. The financial security provided by the lawsuit settlement and career advancement created independence that protected me from ever again being vulnerable to family manipulation tactics. The emergency fund, stable income, and debt-free status meant that I could make decisions based on personal values rather than financial pressure or emotional blackmail. The restraining orders against my parents and Victoria provided legal protection that enforced the no-contact boundaries necessary for my continued healing and growth. The legal system's recognition that their behavior constituted harassment and threat provided external validation for maintaining distance from people who had proven themselves willing to commit crimes for financial gain. 2 years after the final court proceedings, I can honestly say that my life has been transformed in ways I never thought possible during those dark months when my family's criminal behavior threatened to destroy everything I had worked to build. The peace and stability that come from living free of manipulation and exploitation feel almost miraculous after decades of psychological warfare disguised as family obligation. The healing process required professional therapy to address the complex trauma of systematic family betrayal and financial abuse. Working with Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in family psychological trauma, helped me understand how childhood patterns of emotional manipulation had prepared me to accept treatment that no healthy adult relationship should tolerate. Family financial abuse creates particularly deep psychological wounds because it attacks both our economic security and our fundamental beliefs about love and loyalty, Dr. Chen explained during our sessions. Victims often struggle with guilt and self-doubt because society teaches us that family relationships are sacred and unconditional. Learning to prioritize your own well-being over dysfunctional family harmony requires rebuilding your entire emotional foundation. The therapy helped me recognize how my parents had systematically conditioned me to accept responsibility for other people's emotional regulation and financial security while neglecting my own needs and boundaries. Understanding these patterns was essential for building healthy relationships where mutual respect replaced manipulation and emotional blackmail. The relationship with James continued developing into a partnership that demonstrated what love looks like when it's not contaminated by financial exploitation or psychological manipulation. Our engagement after 18 months together was based on genuine compatibility and shared values rather than economic convenience or family pressure. "I love that your family accepts me for who I am rather than what I can provide financially," I told James during our wedding planning conversations. "It's amazing to experience relationships where people's affection doesn't depend on my ability to solve their problems or fund their dreams." Our wedding, funded by our own savings and planned according to our own preferences, represented freedom from the manipulation tactics that had made Victoria's fake wedding such a nightmare. The career advancement to department supervisor brought professional fulfillment that reflected my actual capabilities rather than my ability to survive family psychological warfare. Leading a team of nurses who respected my expertise and integrity felt completely different from managing relationships where my value was measured only by financial contributions. The Nursing Scholarship Fund had grown to support 12 students annually, with recipients chosen based on academic merit and demonstrated resilience in overcoming family challenges. Reading their application essays reminded me that family financial abuse was unfortunately common, but also that it was possible to break free from destructive patterns and build successful, independent lives. "Your scholarship made it possible for me to complete nursing school without depending on family members who wanted to control my career choices," wrote Jennifer Martinez, one of the first recipients who had graduated and begun her own successful practice. "The financial support was important, but knowing that someone understood the challenges of family manipulation was even more valuable." The speaking engagements at conferences and support groups had evolved into consultation work helping other families recognize and address financial abuse before it escalated to criminal levels. Working with families in crisis provided perspective on how destructive patterns develop and reinforced my gratitude for having escaped before suffering even more serious damage. The community recognition for my advocacy work included appointment to the county's Elder Abuse Prevention Task Force, where my experiences provided insight into how family financial exploitation operated and how victims could be better supported by social services and law enforcement. The work felt meaningful because it transformed personal trauma into protection for other vulnerable people. My parents' incarceration period had ended 6 months ago, but the no-contact boundaries remained firmly in place through continued restraining orders that reflected ongoing concerns about potential retaliation or renewed manipulation attempts. Their release from prison had been accompanied by strict probation conditions that limited their ability to contact me or access information about my current life. Victoria's attempts to re-establish contact had been consistently rebuffed through legal channels that protected me from direct manipulation while allowing her to communicate through attorneys if she had legitimate legal matters to address. Her probation officer had reported that she was struggling to maintain employment and housing without family financial support, But those challenges were natural consequences of her choices rather than problems I was obligated to solve. The decision to maintain permanent no contact with family members who had committed crimes against me was supported by both my therapist and legal advisors, who recognized that some relationships are too toxic to repair regardless of biological connections. The guilt and social pressure to forgive and forget had been overcome through understanding that healthy forgiveness doesn't require exposing oneself to continued abuse. Forgiveness is an internal process that releases you from carrying anger and resentment, Dr. Chen had explained. It doesn't require reconciliation or renewed relationship with people who haven't demonstrated genuine change and accountability. You can forgive someone while still protecting yourself from their continued potential to cause harm. The financial security provided by the lawsuit settlement, career advancement, and debt elimination had created independence that protected me from ever again being vulnerable to economic manipulation by family members or anyone else. The emergency fund, retirement savings, and stable income meant that my decisions could be based on personal values rather than financial pressure. The home I shared with James, purchased with money from my grandmother's inheritance and the lawsuit settlement, represented stability and security that my family's criminal behavior had tried to destroy. Every mortgage payment and home improvement project felt like a celebration of the independence and self-determination that I had fought so hard to protect. The relationships with chosen family members, James's relatives, close friends like Patricia, colleagues who had supported me through the crisis, provided models for what healthy family dynamics could look like. Holiday gatherings filled with genuine affection and mutual support felt completely different from the manipulation and exploitation that had characterized my biological family interactions. The lessons learned through surviving family financial abuse had application far beyond my personal situation. Understanding manipulation tactics helped me recognize similar patterns in other relationships and professional situations, providing skills for protecting myself and others from exploitation attempts. The experience taught me that healthy relationships require mutual respect, honest communication, and shared responsibility, I reflected during a recent interview for a magazine article about family financial abuse. When someone demands that you sacrifice your financial security for their emotional satisfaction, that's not love, that's exploitation. The peace that comes from living authentically according to personal values rather than family expectations feels like a gift that I never take for granted. Making decisions based on what's actually best for my well-being and future rather than what will avoid family conflict or manipulation has created a life filled with genuine happiness and satisfaction. Looking back on the crisis that once threatened to destroy everything I had worked to build, I can see how it ultimately freed me from relationships and patterns that were preventing me from reaching my full potential. The family that tried to exploit me financially actually did me a favor by revealing their true character before I wasted more years trying to earn love through financial sacrifice. The final wisdom that emerged from this experience is understanding that saying no to family manipulation is actually saying yes to yourself and to the possibility of authentic relationships based on genuine care rather than financial obligation. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually the ones preventing you from discovering how much better life can be when you're free to choose relationships that truly honor your worth as a human being. Have you ever experienced family financial pressure or manipulation in your own life? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because sharing these stories helps all of us recognize warning signs and support each other through difficult family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach other people who might need to hear about standing up for themselves against family exploitation. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. And please share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding that family love shouldn't require financial sacrifice of your own security and dreams. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to protect your own well-being even when family members pressure you to prioritize their wants over your needs. Remember that you deserve relationships where your value isn't measured by what you can provide financially, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries that protect everyone from unhealthy patterns that ultimately harm the entire family system.